Thank you very much for attending today as members of the international press or the national press, Egyptian press. This press conference is specifically being held to clarify Egypt's official position on the ongoing war in Gaza and what is happening in the Middle East since the 7th of October. It will be divided into two sections. First will be a few points that are very important to clarify the Egyptian position, in addition to some recent developments and information regarding aid as well as the losses incurred by Gazans. Second segment will be to receive your questions. I will start the first segment to discuss and clarify the official Egyptian position with regards to the latest developments. We should also remind you of all the things that have been done by Egypt since the end of 2022 till this current moment in time. Egypt, on the 9th of December 2022, the Foreign Ministry in a release warned of the escalating violence as the Palestinian martyrs exceeded 200 people in the last 8 months at the time. On the 11th of April 2023, Egypt, France, Germany and Jordan also called for the ceasefire in the areas and a stop to the military attacks and the stopping of attacks that are destroying the chances of a two-state solution. On the 9th of May 2023, Egypt also spoke about the attacks on the Aqsa Mosque by the Israeli occupation forces. So we've also been talking about all the recent attacks in history of the Palestinian cause. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has in several occasions spoken about the clear position of Egypt and the Egyptian stance. For over the last 75 years, Egypt has never ever given up on the Palestinian cause. On the contrary, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi constantly calls for a two-state solution and always talks about the Palestinian cause and situation in the Palestinian territories. The Egyptians always have supported the Palestinian cause. And now it has become a global concern, not just for the Arab region, but the whole world. We are now seeing a response, an international response, an unprecedented attention to the Palestinian cause, only to try and maintain international peace. The Egyptian position has been clarified several times by the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. And Egypt definitely, with regards to the Palestinian cause, sees a clear vision that the Palestinian issue must be resoluted to international laws and Security Council resolutions, and all the resulted negotiations. And the only acceptable solution for Egypt is a Palestinian state in the occupied lands for the 1967 borders with Jerusalem as its capital. This is a clear Egyptian stance which has been undertaken by many other nations worldwide. However, over the last 75 years has not been reached so far. And it was supposed to see a two-state solution which has not come to fruition over the last 75 years. This is the first step. A two-state solution, the first step. Second step is what is happening with regards to the violence in the Gaza Strip, and what we're seeing is a result of policies that we have seen over the last years from 1967, that we have seen these attacks by the occupation forces. This is not an excuse for what has happened, but a result of what has happened. Egypt sees that the result, the two-state solution and the ceasefire and the constant attacks on civilians or on religious entities in West Jerusalem is now for the last 16 years been seen. This is a resultant of the violence that has been witnessed over all these years, and this violence will never stop unless these original policies are halted. The third and fourth step, Egypt definitely rejects any civilians being targeted, and we do not see how Israel is targeting civilians in Gaza and their constant attack on infrastructure and civilian institutions in Palestine, which is, of course, not in keeping with international law, and further worsening the situation and further destroying any aim to find a resolution to this crisis. With regards to some information, the latest information that we have received with regards to what happened to the Gaza Strip since the 7th of October. Till today, we have over 5,800 martyrs and 16,800 wounded. Out of these, 2,800 of them are children, and over 1,300 are women, and 300 children. Under the rubble, we have more than 1,500 people still under the rubble. These numbers are numbers that we have seen. We have seen these children, we have seen these women, we have seen them on all the screens, we have seen their stories, we have seen their remains. We have seen the coverage by media outlets. However, we only see one representation of all the constant attacks on the Palestinians. We are not seeing enough coverage. However, no humanitarian coverage whatsoever is present in international media outlets. You are members of the media, and this is your responsibility. Why is Israel not allowing international media presence in Gaza? Why? Only a few representatives of international media outlets have been allowed, and some of them have been killed. However, absolutely no international media has been allowed inside. Why is this? We have 12 hospitals that have been totally destroyed, and 32 health centers. We have 65 medical practitioners that have been martyred. They're supposed to have been protected by international laws. However, they have also been killed. We have 32 martyrs from the United Nations and its different organizations inside Gaza. Instead of keeping the peace, they are also being targeted. 25 ambulances have been totally destroyed as well. With regards to homes and housing in the Gaza Strip, we have 1,400,000 people have been displaced from their homes and have fled the Gaza Strip, which is over 70% of the populace of the Gaza Strip. They have all left their homes and head to refugee camps. And even out of these, we're talking about 1,400,000 people have left their homes. These people now live, as you know, in search of security. They are either living in hospitals, churches, or mosques, or even schools under UNRWA's protection, or government schools. Yet none of these areas were spared the Israeli attacks. In the Gaza Strip, we have 181,000 homes that have been destroyed, and 20,000 others have been totally removed off the ground. 72 government buildings have also been destroyed. 177 schools have been either totally destroyed. 32 mosques and 3 churches have all been destroyed. This is the scene on the ground in the Gaza Strip. This is the Egyptian position with regards to the condemnation of the situation in the Palestinian territories. The Egyptian situation is insisting that this continued attack and violence is again an indication of the lack of a political resolution to the situation in Israel and Palestine. This constant Israeli attacks on the Palestinian territories and occupied territories in Palestine once again is a clear indication of the continued destruction of the Palestinian people's rights in a two-state solution with Jerusalem as its capital. And again, this has resulted in Egypt taking many steps over the last few days in order to address these issues. Egypt again is condemning and confirming that Egypt will never allow any security breach on Egyptian land. This is a red line. I repeat, this is a red line. Egypt warns that Egyptian national security is a red line, and it will never, ever, ever condemn the fact of removing the Palestinians into Sinai, and this is totally refused, regardless of whatever side discusses this issue. Again, Egypt is warning of the humanitarian catastrophe occurring now in the Gaza Strip, especially with the Israeli occupation stopping many vital needs like water, electricity, etc. And Egypt is continuously exerting its utmost efforts to keep the Rafah border crossing open, to allow humanitarian aid through, and allow, of course, all the envoys and the trucks full of food and medical supplies to pass and reach the Gazan civilians. In this regard, I will also tell you some statistics regarding these convoys. So far, till today, till now, we have a total of, over the last 3 days, till yesterday, 457 tons of medical supplies. With regards to food, 251 tons of food items, water, 87 tons of water, till yesterday have been delivered. 54 trucks so far till yesterday have crossed over with these supplies. And today we are expecting over 20 trucks that have crossed to result in 74 trucks in total. 39 aeroplanes have arrived in Egypt from different nations with aid and supply. From Kenya, the latest plane. And of course, other countries include Tunisia, Venezuela, Brazil, Jordan, India, Kuwait, Algeria, Iraq, amongst others, including the World Health Organization, as well as UNRWA, in addition to the other aid from the Egyptian Red Crescent or from the Decent Life Presidential Initiative, amongst other Egyptian NGOs and institutions. Egypt is intensifying its efforts with the international community to achieve, number one, the continued and sustainable delivery of aid to Gaza. Second, the collaboration with other entities like UNRWA to deliver aid. This is not just up to negotiations once in a while, but this is a move for a sustainable delivery with collaboration with other entities like UNRWA. And we confirm that the Rafah border crossing has not closed to aid deliveries, even though it has already been attacked over 4 times by Israeli military. And this has resulted in the damage of the roads from the Rafah border crossing to Gaza. And the Egyptian authorities have already stepped in to fix these roads in order to allow further delivery of aid. However, we need the international community plus Israel to confirm that the aid would not be destroyed or attacked. Egypt is also calling for a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire, and the entry of talks as soon as possible in order to reach some sort of negotiation and peace talks. As President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said, this is a critical step, not just an Egyptian demand, but the UN Security Chief, the United Nations Chief, Antonio Guterres, has also called for the same immediate ceasefire. And many other countries have called for this. However, lots of other Western countries are scared to call for this ceasefire as a result of their relationship with Israel. And this is not in line with the United Nations resolutions and all international and global agreements and legislations and jurisdiction and humanitarian law. And of course the 4 agreements of Geneva. And this addition of the right of Israel to defend itself is just an excuse. Yet, what is actually happening on the ground has nothing to do whatsoever with international law or humanitarian law whatsoever. Egypt now has a priority during this critical time, which is to allow humanitarian aid to arrive to the residents of Gaza. Egypt, in this regard, is doing its best and working with many different entities and calling upon the international community to do what it can to save the Palestinian people from death, not just as a result of the war, but as a result of hunger, starvation, and disease. If this aid is not delivered, Gaza will become the biggest cemetery in the world. 2.3 million people, out of them 1 million children, are now threatened by this death, imminent death. Egypt is calling for all the international community to step up, and Egypt sees that, yes, we must quickly do what is needed. And Egypt has already played a big role with regards to issues related to hostages taken, and Egypt has already played a role in the release of 2 hostages that have been released and handed over to the Israeli authorities. Egypt sees that this is an important file which must be directly linked to humanitarian aid to the citizens of Gaza. This is the bigger picture and the bigger aim, to save these innocent civilians, these hundreds of thousands of innocent people, which have already had over 5,800 people martyred over the last 2 weeks. And now these hostages, as one of them today said, that they were actually well treated as hostages, and she was even allocated a doctor. However, the Palestinians are being murdered, their doctors are being murdered, their hospitals are being attacked, and they have absolutely no medical supplies to allow them to save their injured and attacked civilians. Therefore, the international community must keep this in mind. We also have, with regards to the situation of the position of Egypt, we need to remind of a few things. The discussing of the Palestinian resistance, or Hamas, that has been said that they started the attacks. However, this is not the case and has never been the case in history. Hamas was created in 1987 after 40 years of the Nakba of Palestine. Over those last 40 years, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been martyred, rather 10,000, sorry, and over hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been attacked over those 40 years. A number of martyrs under the Palestinian cause since 1947 is over 100,000 martyrs, and over 1 million people have been injured over the last 40 years. Over 12,600,000 Palestinians have been displaced all around in different refugee camps and many other areas all around the world. Over 12,600,000 Palestinians. These are not a result of Hamas's resistance or any Palestinian resistance. These are a result of the Israeli attacks. Hamas is only considered to be about 12 million in terms of their population. Therefore, the beginning of this was not the 7th of October or even what happened before 1987, but the occupation forces of Israel have been present before Hamas's induction for over 20 years. The Hamas movement only appeared in 1987. 20 years of suffering by the Palestinian people after their occupation. Even the other resistant factions in Gaza. I want to point out what President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said. As well as the American Foreign Secretary, Antony Blinken, who said that there have been over 12,500 civilian deaths versus 2,500 Israeli deaths. We have over 100,000 Palestinians that have been injured compared to the 12,000 Israelis. 2,500 children have been martyred in front of the 150 Israeli kids. These numbers are clear and they show the history of the conflict. However, we have to look to our history in order to look at the future. There are deep-rooted causes. In case people have forgotten, this area has seen many, many wars: 1948, 65, 73, 1982. These are just some of the regional wars, never mind the Intifada or the Palestinian resistance inside the country. We've already seen 2, at least, Intifadas in Palestine before the establishment of Hamas in 1987, December 1987, and after that 3 years later. In these 2 Intifadas, the Palestinian people expressed themselves. And the history of this area has shown us over and over that there is no solution. There is no solution, and there is no resolution that will ever show the Palestinians removed. And all we can see now that the scope of the attacks and the resistance is now on the rise and on the increase. And again, we are seeing the different areas that are being pulled into this war. If this is not resolved through negotiations and a political resolution under international law, this conflict will further escalate and not reach a solution. This is a critical moment in time. We have to find a solution with regards and under the international law umbrellas. Egypt is trying to find a resolution to the cause, not just the current situation. We are now looking at a regional conflict, yet it can spill over to become an international one. Also, I will conclude with this and give you the floor to receive questions. we have some documents that are not being discussed or maybe forgotten, and I will talk about two only. The first is known by all, which is the Fourth Geneva Agreement, 1949, which talks about the rights of occupied peoples. And we confirm Gaza is occupied territory. The control, the military power and security power is under the arm of the occupation forces. Occupation does not necessarily mean the presence of military soldiers all around the area. However, the presence of occupation forces, Gaza is under international law an occupied territory. That is why they should follow the Fourth Agreement of Geneva. Aside from the Geneva Agreement, in 1990, December of 1990, there was a Security Council resolution 681, which stated the fourth segment spoke about the call by the Security Council of the Israeli government to keep in mind all the occupied territory and must keep into account international law. Part 6. Yes, the United Nations, and I am speaking now to the UN Security, the United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres, the need to collaborate with international organizations regarding the need to hold meetings of international parties to reach a resolution with regards to ceasefire. The seventh point, again a call to monitor the situation of Palestinian civilians that are under the Israeli occupation and new efforts that need to be taken into account as soon as possible with regards to the presence of international entities and bodies to make sure that they are being protected under international legislation. Once again, I want to repeat. Egypt is looking for peace, peaceful resolution since 1979 and has been respecting this to keep the peace between Egypt and Israel and the region as a whole. But Egypt is also wants to remind you, 1979 signed a peace treaty for the region as a whole. This agreement was signed by both parties. The Egyptian vision since the start is not about individual peace between Egypt and Israel, but regional peace settlement and the resolution of the main issue, which is that of the Palestinian cause. Egypt's aim to protect peace in the area, and these atrocities and attacks are setting up a failure of Arabs' protection of their rights. And the United Nations has a great role to play in restoring security. And Egypt is constantly calling for the following of the two-state solution must be the main goal of the negotiations and agreements. The creation of a Palestinian state on its Palestinian occupied lands since 1967, borders with Jerusalem as its capital. Thank you very much, and I now open the floor to questions. Go ahead, Adam. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much. My call is for the international media to take some of the footage that is being made available in order to show the reality on the ground. And I'm calling for a clear availability of this to all media institutions, especially Western media. We are keen to keep the picture clear and availability of information available to all outlets. After the International Peace Conference that was held in Egypt on Saturday, how do you see the message that was delivered by Egypt? Thank you. Another question, please. At first, I'd like to thank the Egyptian State Information Service and you for your efforts. Secondly, also I'd like to thank the political Egyptian leadership for their historical role and efforts in the last few days, and to affirm that the Egyptian people stand behind the political leadership and in support of the protection of the Egyptian national security, which is a priority for Egyptian citizens, and specifically the security of the Egyptian land in Sinai. My question: what role is Egypt playing in the fight against the continued escalation by the Israeli occupation forces against the Gazans? Thank you. All right, I'm going to answer some of the questions. Some of the answers to the questions quickly. The Cairo Peace Summit or conference that happened on Saturday came at a very critical time, and this time, regardless of this time, lots of countries attended and participated, and these international organizations like the UN or the Arab League or the African Union all attended. The attendance of the different delegates in this summit is a clear indication that showed that there is a grave problem, not a simple one, and this war that can spill over not just from in the region but spill over internationally, and Cairo is moving to reach a resolution and highlight the danger of such a war. And the leaders, the international leaders and different countries that attended this summit were over hundreds. And this shows the Egyptian leadership's effective role in shedding light on the issue. And this was a very important step to allow different leaders from all around the world to sit together and indicate that there is a difference of opinion with regards to the conflict. The different policies. And this difference should not stop the continued interaction, and what was said by the different delegates that attended shows that there is agreement in other areas. For example, the agreement of a two-state solution. Not a single speaker said that this was not the main resolution of this conflict. Secondly, the war does not reach any resolution. On the contrary, even though some spoke about the Israelis' rights to defend itself, however, they did not condemn and condone the war, its importance or need, and the need to stop collective punishment was a major call by all the attendees until today. Until today, we have seen some countries now are calling for a humanitarian ceasefire, even though that was not said clearly in the summit by some of these countries, but now they are calling for this humanitarian ceasefire. Another agreement that was highlighted because of the summit or conference held in Egypt was that all the countries and attendees, even some of the countries that are on the Israeli side of the conflict, they all agreed that this conflict is not just a result of what happened on the 7th of October, but as a result of years and years of occupation. Not a single attendee could say that this just occurred on the 7th of October 2023, but this is resultant of years of occupation and conflict. a result of the history of the suffering. So the Cairo summit had a very important message. Secondly, it spoke about there is a need to stop this conflict, and there must be other players in the region and collaboration between different international organizations in this regard. I did not see really any attack on the Egyptian stance. On the contrary, Egypt is supporting the humanitarian cause. We, of course, in Egypt are monitoring the situation and respect different opinions. However, the opinions or even attacks on Egypt should be based on facts and information. The way that different populations resist occupation, that depends on the actual population themselves. We have seen so many different organizations and other resistance factions. We used to see different naming. And all resistance groups in Palestine have been accused of being terrorists. International community and Israel have never ever said that there is a right for the Palestinians to defend themselves. Before even Hamas appeared in 1987, any resistance movements were always accused of being terrorists, regardless of what they were called at the time. To all the different factions and the Palestinian factions, they have all been called terrorist organizations, not just in Israel, but all occupying land, all occupying countries. All occupying countries speak about any resistance as terrorism, as terrorists. Even for the United States, the Vietnamese were terrorists. Different populations in Africa as well were accused of being terrorists. And this is always how occupation governments name resistance as terrorists. This is, and in this regard, Egypt supports resistance to occupation. Since 1948 and 1956, and every single Palestinian faction in Egypt has supported them to speak on behalf of the Palestinian people under international laws and legislations. And the Egyptian authorities and Egyptian political leadership over the years has always supported the right of the Palestinians to defend themselves. With regards to the Egyptian role, Egypt is not for the increase or escalation of conflict in the region. This is a constant security threat, not just for the national security or regional security, but international security. This is not an exaggeration. As we see main countries now, like surrounding the region and with a military presence, this is a critical escalation. We're seeing the regional conflict moving into a global conflict, and this is a very dangerous move and step. We are continuing our persistent calls for humanitarian ceasefire, as well as the delivery of humanitarian aid, as well as the resolution of the hostages held. And we are very, very keen in this regard. As we've seen yesterday, Egypt negotiated the release of 2 hostages, which had been returned to Israel. Egypt has played a role in bringing the Palestinian cause to the forefront, especially with regards to the last summit and conference that was held. Why was there no communique delivered by Egypt after the summit? Thank you. Okay, I'll answer some of these questions and then continue with the more questions. Firstly, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Amin. Of course, the Cairo conference was held for this regard, For our friend from Japan, of course, we want you to know that there are some dual nationalities, for example, dual nationalities that are at the Rafah crossing from the Gaza side, and they were supposed to be allowed to enter through the Rafah border to whichever country they chose after agreement with their embassies in Egypt, in Cairo. I assure you, all the collaboration for the foreigners to be let in to Egypt has been negotiated and decided with the different embassies of these dual nationalities that Egypt has been in touch with and in contact with. We're talking about over 45 different embassies, 45 different nationalities. Most of them have diplomatic either embassies or consulates in Egypt, and Egypt has been in touch with their embassies to allow their entry, and diplomatic sources told their nationals to head to the Rafah border crossing to prepare to cross the crossing and enter into Egypt. However, their embassies called them and asked them to return to where they have come from. Egypt has been in touch with the different embassies of the 45 countries, told them to return, which of course has delayed their crossing into Egypt through the Rafah border crossing, and this as a result of the Israeli authorities. The Rafah border crossing is not safe for the crossing of these people as a result of the Israeli occupation and Israeli military and the attacks on the crossing. Already the crossing has been attacked 4 times, and the roads leading to the crossing, these nationalities and their embassies, fearing for their lives, have asked them to leave the Rafah border crossing from the Gaza side, and this is not yet possible. Also, there needs to be a presence of employees. However, Israel sees these employees as Hamas members, and hence they are under threat if they go. The reason these foreign nationalities have not been able to leave Gaza is the Israeli forces, the Israeli occupation forces. And until today, Egypt is willing to receive them. However, the problem is in the Israeli side and Israeli authorities. The messages to the Palestinians and Israelis from Egypt are similar. The first message is, you are 2 sides. There will not be one that will remain and one that will be removed. And this is more for the Israeli side. The removal of the Palestinians and their massacres and their genocides is not going to happen. On the contrary, the Palestinians have actually increased in population and in size over 10 times. They were 1,200,000 people. Now they are over 12 million Palestinians, irregardless of the living conditions. And our message for the Israeli side is, you must accept that you are 2 sides, and you should have at least the same rights. The Palestinians have already accepted to have their lands down to 45%, and Israel 55% of the land. However, Palestinians now only have 22% of the land. Even this small percentage is not accepted by the Israelis. The message is clear. If one of the sides, specifically the Israelis, think that the Palestinians will be removed, this is not realistic and will further delay negotiations. Secondly, negotiations are under and should be under the international community's umbrella. This must occur under international law and legislations. After World War II, the whole world struggled. The International Organization of the United Nations was set to stop such atrocities that were witnessed in World War II. So how can the United Nations resolutions not be accepted, even though they have been created to have peace prevail? How can Israel not accept UN resolutions that were actually originally made to protect people after World War II and people that were minorities even? How? How can we not go back to these resolutions? We must go back to international law and legislation and UN resolutions, or the alternative is weapons and power, and usually this never ever succeeds. Until today, we have never seen a resistance being destroyed or defeated. History knows no specific case of any colonialism power prevailing. Always the resolution, and always it always starts with resistance, which eventually, one day, sooner or later, must come to fruition and usually wins, regardless of how weak this resistance was. These are all messages that are clear, and we are saying these messages directly and constantly to the two sides, the Palestinians and Israelis. As for the European leaders that speak about the right to defend oneself, I ask, is this right to defend yourself under international law different than resistance laws? Is this part of the international law? Or is it just a right to defend yourself? How about the right to resist occupation and the right to defend oneself? Is this just under specific countries, or is this a right for all humans? The size of human losses is barbaric. The size of these losses. Over 10,000 homes have been destroyed in Palestine just because one person that is living in this house is viewed as part of the resistance. We need to find a law and a punishment for the destruction of such homes. Tell me, where is the right to defend oneself? I'm telling now every single leader listening to me the right to defend oneself. If it is not used by both sides, this means it will reach even further conflict and worsen the situation that we've seen over the last 16 days. We're looking at thousands of martyrs and these children that have been martyred. And I'm asking, as our Egyptian president asked, are these not kids and these not kids? Are they not all children of the world? Or does the world just close its eyes when they don't want to see? This is the right to defend yourself. It's not just about, in Western countries, it's not about even human rights, we even talk about animal rights. So what is happening now is not defending or right to defend itself. This unprecedented attack on Gaza and the death of all these civilians, using over 6,000 tons of weapons and ammunition, and attacks on hospitals, schools, mosques and churches. This is not the right to defend yourself. How can we call this a right to defend yourself? This is barbaric. What we can call this is a barbaric action. We are calling on all Western political figures, all Western leaders, even media members of the West, to come out and protest and look once again at the eyes and remains of these Palestinian children that are being martyred and murdered, that are writing their names on their hands and legs in case they are martyred, at least they can be identified. We must know. We're looking for the Western factions, Western leaders, to go look for yourselves what's happening in Gaza. Look on the ground. You can go in and look for yourselves. You can visit Gaza and see. If you can visit Israel, you can also visit Gaza and see the Palestinians. Just make sure you secure your visit by the occupation forces. My final point. Again, this is the second time I repeat my answer to my question. I guarantee you we will do our best to get members of the international media to the closest area on the Rafah border. However, your entry to Gaza is something we cannot do unless the Israeli military occupation forces allow you to. I'm sure the citizens of Gaza will welcome you. However, it will be not safe for you, and your lives will not be safe unless the occupation forces guarantee your safety. If the occupation forces can guarantee your security, even though they've already killed over 20 journalists until this moment have been killed and murdered in Gaza as a result of the occupation fire. So, if you can make sure the occupation forces guarantees your security, we will be happy. But what we can do now is to take you to the furthest area of the Rafah border crossing on the Egyptian side. There are also some Egyptians in Gaza that are struggling to come back to Egypt. Do you mean the Egyptians? Who? Which? I'm talking about Egyptian families that are stuck in Gaza and are trying to get back into Egypt. They are stuck with their children in Khan Yunis and are unable to return to Egypt. I'm asking what is to happen to them. Okay, let me answer some of these questions. Our friend from Spain, the negotiations regarding hostages. The negotiations regarding the hostages, the details of these hostages and these negotiations cannot usually be announced, but this is a clear message, a dual message, that the Egyptian authorities are doing their maximum efforts and using all their resources with regards to negotiating hostages, especially civilian hostages, with dual nationalities. What happened yesterday is an example, an important example of this, and how the Israeli side has not announced the release of these hostages, even though it has been announced by several media outlets. But the Egyptian side has continued its negotiations for these hostages and other hostages. However, no details will be released at the moment, but we are doing our best with regards to hostages for humanitarian reasons, of course. And we've seen Kata'ib Izzeddin Qassem's movement announcing that it is willing to let go of any foreign hostages when the situation permits. So Egypt is doing all it can with regards to its negotiating powers in this regard. Fatma from Yunus Seba, of course, the Egyptians in Gaza are very difficult to distinguish from the Gazans themselves. We have lots of families that are dual nationalities. For example, the husband is Egyptian, the wife is Palestinian, etc. lots of children as well that are half Egyptian, dual nationals. And of course, we are obviously not ignoring them, but as I told you, the crossings from the Palestinian side as a result of the Israeli occupation forces are unsafe. The border crossings, once again, as a result of the Israeli occupation, are unsafe as a result of the Israeli military presence. Either for Egyptians or other foreigners, the Israeli military occupation forces are constantly threatening the Palestinian employees on the Rafah crossing from the Palestinian side, and even the Egyptian side of the Rafah border. The employees are trying to do their best. However, Israel is saying that the employees on the Rafah side of the crossing in Palestine are being accused of being members of Hamas. And of course, the foreign embassies are concerned about their nationals and are worried about their safety, and hence could not permit them to try and cross the border crossing, and they have been advised to return to whence they came. And we are saying that it is up to the the Israeli side to play their role with regards to foreign nationals and ensure their safety and allow them and not attack them, to allow them to cross and leave Gaza. With regards to aid deliveries by Egypt, once again, it's the same response. The Rafah border crossing is not simply run by the Egyptian side. It was not even made for truck deliveries between the two countries. However, it is being used in this regard. However, what it is being used for now is an exception, and Egypt now is trying to enable the crossing of all the aid. So far, 54 trucks have crossed, and 20 today have crossed, even though there's over 250 trucks waiting to enter Gaza. And the Egyptians are very keen to get this aid across. However, the Israeli side is impeding the arrival and the crossing of these trucks safely. The Israeli authorities, until today, are not even allowing the delivery of fuel. And this is a critical issue that is needed. The Israeli side is threatening the delivery of these aid trucks, and it's threatening to bombard them. And of course, we don't want to waste this aid, to just have it cross and then become ruined and bombed. And we are calling for the international community to play a role in this regard and allow the Western countries, especially the United States of America, with regards to humanitarian aid and relief. President Joe Biden spoke to President Sisi, and they agreed on sustainable delivery of these aid trucks, and a secure delivery, secure, sustainable delivery. And the role now of the Western countries is to get the aid across and convince the Israeli side to stop bombing them and give them safe passage in order to get the stuff to the people that need it and the civilians that are in need. Over 450 trucks are needed to cross every day just to allow people in the Gaza Strip to survive. But so far, only 54 since the 7th of October have crossed, and today only 20 instead of the needed 450 trucks. This means this is insufficient. This is something that the international community needs to talk to the occupation forces to allow. Otherwise, this is no longer a war, but collective punishment and massacre and genocide according to the Geneva Agreement. More questions? Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We just brought you a live press conference held by the head of the Egyptian State Information Service, Rashwan. The press conference addressed the Egyptian position on the ongoing war in Gaza, as well as he answered many questions by members of the international media with regards to the situation on the ground, with regards to the delivery of aid and the role played by Egypt and the international community. And of course, he called for the continued pressure of the international community on the Israeli occupation forces to allow the aid to cross through safely to reach